This is Bombay, November 25th, 1932. Although Prabhupada had come to Bombay with hopes of finishing the land transaction, Mr. N was still delaying, despite the new agreement. Obviously, his stalling was simply part of his plan to cheat ISKCON. So Prabhupada went to many days in Bombay. Srila Prabhupada waited many days in Bombay, finally departing for a Panca program in Ahmedabad. He left behind instructions for his disciples to get the deed on the new terms, or else to take it back the original 2 lakhs of rupees and pay as a down payment. While Srila Prabhupada was away, however, Swami Sundar, Tamal Krishna Goswami, and the others began talking about how even if they could
from Ahmedabad, Prabhupada continued to wage his Bombay campaign, and he requested Mr. N and Mr. D to come to Ahmedabad to try and make it a settlement. They declined. In Bombay, the devotees learned that if they wanted to get back their down payment as well as the money they had deposited toward the 5 lakh gains tax, then they would have to cancel the new agreement. They were confused and their time was running out. One morning, one of Prabhupada's disciples, Vishaka Devi Dasi, arrived in Ahmedabad from Bombay. Prabhupada called for her and told her to return to Bombay immediately with a message. Out of concern that his leaders in Bombay not make a wrong decision and decide to relinquish the land, he told her to tell them that they should actually not under any circumstances cancel the agreement with Mr. N. Actually, he said, this is not a woman's job, but everyone else here is either engaged in the pandal or has not been with us long enough to do this task. Vishaka took the next train out of Ahmedabad and arrived in Bombay the following morning. But what Prabhupada had foreseen had already happened. The devotees had cancelled the sales agreement. They were convinced that to get the land would be a mistake, and the lawyers had agreed, pointing out that if devotees wanted to retrieve their money, they should cancel the agreement immediately. When the devotees heard Prabhupada's message from Ahmedabad, confusion reigned. They now had no legal standing, no claim to the land, and they had failed to carry out Prabhupada's desire. Giriraj phoned Prabhupada in Ahmedabad to tell him what had happened to him. Bhaktivedanta Swami here, Prabhupada said, as he took the telephone. Giriraj was saying that a devotee had come from Ahmedabad with a message. Yes, Prabhupada said. What is the point? Finally, Giriraj pointed out that they had already cancelled the sales agreement. Prabhupada was silent. In a voice that expressed both anger and resignation, he said, then everything is finished. Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 15, entitled Narada and Angira Instruct King Chitraketu. Text 25. Ayam hi dehino deho. Dravya Jnana Kriyatmakaha. Dehino Vivida Kresha. Santapa Krit Udahrita. Ayam hi dehino deho. Dravya Jnana Kriyatmakaha. Dehino Vivida Klesha. Santapa Krit Udahrita. Ayam hi dehino deho. Dravya Jnana Kriyatmakaha. Dehino Vivida Kresha. Santapa Krit Udahrita. Ayam hi dehino deho. Dravya Jnana Kriyatmakaha. Dehino Vivida Kresha. Santapakrit udarita. Ayam hi deino deo. Dravya Jnana Kriyatmaka. Klesha. Santapakrit udarita. Ayam hi deino deho. Dravya Jnana Kriyatmaka. Tehino Vivida Klesha. Santapakrit udarita. Ayam hi deino deho. Dravya Jnana Kriyatmaka. Dehino Vivida Klesha. Santapakrit udarita. I am this, he, certainly, Dehinaha, of the living entity, Dehaha, body, Dravya Jnana Kriya Atmakaha, consisting of the material elements, senses for acquiring knowledge, and the acting senses, Dehinaha, of the living entity, Vivida, various, Klesha, sufferings, Santapa, and of pains, Krit, the cause, Udahritaha, is declared. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. The living entity in the bodily conception of life is absorbed in the body, which is a combination of the physical elements, the five senses for gathering knowledge, and the five senses of action, along with the mind. Through the mind, the living entity suffers three kinds of tribulations: adibodhika, adidaivika, and adhyapika. Therefore, this body is a source of all miseries. Responsibly, please. The living entity in the bodily conception of life is absorbed in the body, which is a combination of the physical elements, the five senses for gathering knowledge, and the five senses of action, along with the mind. Through the mind, the living entity suffers three kinds of tribulation: adibodhika, adidaivika, and adhyapmika. Therefore, this body is a source of all miseries. Purport. In the fifth canto, while instructing his sons, Rishabdev said, Asanapi Krishida Ashadeha. The body, although temporary, is the cause of all the miseries of material existence. As already discussed in this previous verse, the entire material creation is based on mental concoction. The mind sometimes induces us to think that if we purchase an automobile, we can enjoy the physical elements such as earth, water, air, and fire, combined in forms of iron, plastic, petrol, and so on. Working with the five material elements, Panca Bhutas, as well as with our five knowledge-gathering senses, like the eyes, ears, and tongue, and our five active senses, like the hands and legs, we become involved in the material condition. Thus we are subjected to the tribulations known as Adhyatmika, Adidaivika, and Adibodhika. The mind is the center because the mind creates all these things. As soon as the material object is struck, however, the mind is affected and we suffer. For example, with the material elements, the working senses and the knowledge-gathering senses, we create a very nice car. And when the car is accidentally smashed in a collision, the mind suffers, and through the mind, the living entity suffers. The fact is that the living entity, while concocting with the mind, creates a material condition. Because matter is destructible, Through the material condition, the living entity suffers. Otherwise, the living entity is detached from all material conditions. When one comes to the Brahman platform, the platform of spiritual life, fully understanding that he is spirit soul, aham brahmasmi, he is no longer affected by lamentation or hankering. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 1854, Brahma Bhutta Prasannatma Nasochati Nakankshati. One who is thus transcendently situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments nor desires to have anything. Elsewhere in Bhagavad Gita 15.7, the Lord says, Mami Vamso Jiva Loke Jiva Bhutta Sanatanaha Manasyastanindriyani Prakriti Stani Karshati. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. The living entity is actually part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and is unaffected by material conditions. But because the mind, mana, is affected, the senses are affected, and the living entity struggles for existence within this material world. Momagyanatamrandasya gananjana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam jena tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Daranti Swapadantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijina Saita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shiva Shakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dino Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Suta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpatrubhyashta Kripa Sindhu Bhinevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastichade Sitarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vishnu Padaya Krishna Hare Krishna, dear devotees. I humbly seek your blessings and your good wishes that I'm able to speak something of relevance, which is in line with the text. If we get the message of the Vaishnavas, then anything is possible. Therefore, that's my only hope. Again, this verse: the living entity in the bodily conception of life is absorbed in the body, which is a combination of the physical elements, the five senses for acquiring knowledge, and the five senses of action, along with the mind. Through the mind, the living entity suffers three kinds of tribulation: adibhotika, adidaivika, and adhyatmika. Therefore, this body is a source of all miseries. It's very interesting here in this translation that we see that the different kinds of tribulations we're facing, whether it be from other living entities, from natural phenomenon arranged by the demigods, or whether from ourselves, Adhyatmika. These are all coming through the mind, as stated here. Through the mind, the living entity suffers three kinds of tribulation. But nonetheless, the body is the source of all miseries. This is a real mind control actually comes from identity. Because currently we're completely absorbed in this bodily conception of life. We're thinking with this body, and that's where the suffering arises. Prabhupada gives the example of the car that we invest so much time in creating, and then there's an accident. There's some accident happens to the car, and because our consciousness is in that car, it's actually described in the 11th canto that our mind goes into the sense objects, and the sense objects go into our mind. Because it's funny, like we have this conception, because I have this idea of myself as this body, which is this size, but actually, I'm all of us are eternal spiritual sparks, which are described as 1/10,000th of a tip of a hair. So we've got actually no relation to this actual physical lump of matter. But therefore, our conscience doesn't even need to limit ourselves to just this physical matter, because if we become completely absorbed in thinking, okay, I'm very proud of this car. This is my nice car. I spent a long time building it, etc. Then when an accident happens to the car, we feel physical pain, because in some sense, we've put identity into that car, and the car has become part of us. And so this is where the suffering arises, because everything in the material world is temporary, and therefore there's going to be some lamentation when it leaves. That's why Prabhupada quotes the verse, Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma Nasochati Nakangshati, that when one reaches this, one who is thus transcendentally situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments nor desires to have anything. There's maybe amongst sort of people who are somewhat interested in spirituality, okay, so there's lots of talk about the power of now, being in the moment. You realize Bhagavad Gita is already advocating the power of now long before any spiritual writers are going for it. Because he is describing that when one is transcendently situated, they become fully joyful and they don't lament or desire to have anything. Sama sarveshu bhuteshu madbhaktim bhavate param, and that they see all living entities equally. And that this is a platform when they can engage in devotional service. Mad bhaktim labhate param, unto Krishna. Because people have this, this idea that, okay, I'm feeling some stress right now, therefore I could, this idea of the power of now is to be in the moment, not to worry about the past, not to worry about the future so much, but just to experience this moment as it's coming. In some sense, get beyond the mind. But then once they experience that, there's no actual knowledge about what happens once you're living in the present. It's expected that once you get to that stage, it's just going to be, airy-fairy. You're going to be really happy. And but Krishna here is describing that once you actually get to that platform, then you properly engage in devotional service. Because until we're at that platform, our devotional service is sort of somewhat contaminated by the impurities within the mind, etc. There's other motives. Nonetheless, Krishna still accepts it, but it's described in the spiritual world. People are not lamenting for the past or looking forward to the future in the same sense that we are, because time doesn't so much exist. Here, everything is controlled by time. Time is, the all-devouring form of death. Everything is just decaying. You can ask someone how old they are. Really, you're just asking how many, how many years until they get closer to death. And you buy anything, you get some perhaps car again, and it's got a warranty. You're like, oh, this is great. This car has got a warranty to last for 20 years, but that's just determining, okay, it's going to last. It's going to be a couple more years before it gets destroyed compared to other cars. But still, destruction is just inevitable. So that's what time is in this world. It's just pulling everything down. No matter how big you could conquer the entire world, and still within a couple hundred years, you'll just be completely forgotten about. anyone famous nowadays, no one actually. Oftentimes, my parents' generation or my grandparents' generation, if they refer to someone famous who they think is very inspirational, then my generation, we've got no idea who they are because everything just, dust to dust, ashes to ashes. So that's how time works in the material world. But in the spiritual world, there's no such thing as this all-devouring form of death, this great punisher, because Krishna is completely in control, and everyone there is desiring to increase Krishna's pleasure. This doesn't mean that there's no concept of time. There's a concept of sequence that, first thing in the morning, Krishna's going up and getting dressed, getting a bath. He's going out with the cows, and then perhaps there's some activities. And like this, there's sequence throughout the day. But I've heard it described that, if the cowherd boys are having a great time, having a picnic or something, then there's no reason that this time has to be constrained. Like here, we're always this is a good time, but now I have to finish it up. Whereas it's completely under the desire of Krishna there. So it's but this is far beyond my realization to actually speak about. So the other verse Prabhupada quotes is from 15.7. Mami vamso jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha. So mami vamso jiva loke. This living entity is my eternal fragmental part. This verse just completely refutes so many sort of Mayavad or just spiritual conceptions, because eternally we're a fragmental part of Krishna. And this verse is so reassuring, because Krishna understands, Mana, Shastra, and Indriyani, that the living entity is suffering very, very much with the six senses, which include the mind. But nonetheless, we are his eternal fragmental part. So we find some reassurance in knowing that Krishna understands the somewhat horrendous nature of our situation. This is the interesting thing. Like I was reading recently, Krishna is, he's an ocean of mercy. He's very, very compassionate. But nonetheless, Krishna is fully aware of that we're suffering in the material world, and he wants us to come back to him because we can render service, and also this situation is unnatural for us, or suffering, etc. So in this sense, Krishna is merciful, wants us to come back to us. But the devotees of Krishna, the topmost of whom is Srimati Radharani, they know what it's like to actually be devotees of Krishna. So Krishna, he's somewhat framing it in the negative. Okay, this material world is very bad, so we want to get them out of this situation. But the devotees, they know, okay, this material world is very bad, but how good it is to be a devotee of Krishna. And this is the mood of Mahaprabhu. This is why Mahaprabhu is Namo Mahavadanyaya, Krishna, Mahavadanyaya, the most merciful avatar, because he doesn't just have realization of himself as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He has realization of, what it is to actually be a devotee. And this is the highest ecstasy. Shishikodantai Mahaprabhu Shashiki. And it's described that there's external and internal reasons for Mahaprabhu coming, and the external reasons are, to bestow Krishna prema upon the individuals, etc. The internal reason is to taste this, immensely sweet mellow of devotional service. And because once you taste it, then it is described that the Panca Tattva broke open the seal in the storehouse of love of God, and then they took it to their full extent, to their fullest. but the storehouse never diminished, because that's the nature of the love of God, is the more you take, then the more there actually is. And then once they fully taste it, then then they're just distributing everywhere. And this is the mood of Krishna consciousness, is how much can we just absorb? We have to really taste. They say if you want to distribute books, you have to love the books. You can't just philosophically think that these books are good to distribute, because it wouldn't keep you going. You have to have real taste. And you see devotees who do book distribution long term. We were privileged by the association of His Grace Jambavan Prabhu yesterday in Stirling, and you can see this. He has just such love for the books that he just thinks there's nothing better than to get them out, and he's still living his life. There's just such taste there. So the taste is such a necessity. Because we follow in the footsteps of the great devotees, and all the great devotees were just, properly tasting this fruit of devotional service. So it comes back to this question of identity and the sources of suffering. Is it's described, Shraddha, faith, means to place your heart into something. And so we place, I heard it described that where we put our faith, it's like a tree is very desperate. The tree needs water. And you'll see that the tree is drying up, it grows new roots in many different directions, trying to find sources of water. And then once one root catches on to get some water, then messages get sent to the rest of the tree, and then more roots go here, and it gets bigger. So similarly, when we're looking for pleasure, we're pleasure seeking, anandamaya abhyasat. And then so all these feelers are going out. We're trying many different things and many different species of life even. And once we think we find some pleasure, then we end up putting more and more research. We devote our consciousness to this. What you're thinking of at the time of death, that determines, what species of life or where you take birth next time. We're putting more and more consciousness into something that we think is finding us pleasure. And up then, Parandrishtanavatate, when we actually experience the higher pleasure of engaging in devotional service, then we put more and more shraddha, more faith into that. And this is actually a solid route. Because otherwise we're starving, we're drying up, So again, we see the emphasis on the mind as one of the senses. Of course, you see all the senses are sort of governed by the mind. The mind is like the controlling point. So the senses have some inclination to satisfy themselves, some nice food stuff or some nice smells or etc. And then the mind straight away is thinking of how to actually facilitate this circumstance. You have some desire, you feel some hunger, and then your mind is thinking, okay, I could get this nice food stuff from here, or I could make this, or always sort of coming up with some plans. We described actually the relationship with the spiritual master can also be like this. There's actually 3 different levels of the relationship with the spiritual master. The first is compared to the relationship between a husband and a wife. Of course, this is sort of Vedic conceptions of marriage, which perhaps are not so existent nowadays. But in this conception, the wife is subordinate to the husband, and will, if the husband asks her to do something, then typically she'll do this. But the husband has to often explicitly ask, and moreover, perhaps the wife might carry out what he's asked, but in a somewhat begrudging way. It depends on the relationship, but there has to be sort of explicit statements. I would like this, okay, and I'll do this. So that's one sort of stage we can have with the spiritual master. The spiritual master has to explicitly give us clear instructions regarding, everyday aspects of devotional life. He has to say, you have to get up at this time. You have to read this book. You have to go out. Then a different sort of relationship is described to be like the mind and the senses. So what happened is the mind, the senses just have some desire, some taste, etc. And then the mind is then straight away thinking how to, facilitate this plan. So similarly, the spiritual master, we have to see what the desire of the spiritual master is. Maybe he just says, I would like this. Maybe Prabhupada would say, I want this temple to be open, etc. That's his desire. And then the disciples are always in facilitating how it happens. They're trying to imbibe Prabhupada's mood and put that into action. So this is going to be like a higher and more intimate relationship with the spiritual master. And then the topmost relationship is going to be like the Atma and consciousness. We see actually the consciousness is the symptom of the living entity. Consciousness is emanating from the Atma. And it's non-different in a sense when you can't have one without the other. So this way, even beyond like the having to receive specific instructions, we can just you see this with some of Prabhupada's elevated disciples, was like they're just completely imbibed that mood. And then now you look at these disciples of Prabhupada and you just think of Prabhupada, like the way how they act, how they carry out his movement, how in different ways somehow they how they lead kirtan, all these different things. They've just completely imbibed the mood of the spiritual master, and this is such a perfection of life. We should always be there and be able to serve. Like even we're reading today in Prabhupada Leela Amrita, Vishaka Devi Dasi. She Prabhupada sort of thinking, she's sending her on some sort of legal business matter. Well, this may be perhaps not a job for a woman, but she's a very, very elevated disciple, and she probably, I don't know, had some realizations that she could be here, she could be of service. She's always thinking how to facilitate. Prabhupada needed someone, and she was there. So this is how can we be of service? This is our constant meditation. And I heard one nice realization. There's one elderly brahmachari from the manor, and he was like to me, he was always doing lots of service, throughout his life. And then as his body was, becoming sort of difficult to do any physical service, and he was very much struggling because you take, as a devotee, you take a lot of shelter from service. You have your service you like to do, and etc. And this is how you feel you're being of use, and but nonetheless, these services were being taken away from him because other devotees could see that he wasn't physically fit to be able to do these sort of physical services. So his meditation was just how in any situation can I serve? Like we always have so many reasons. Oh, I can't do this. If only I was at this temple. If only I could be here. If only I could serve that devotee or something. But this is just a false sort of thinking. He was just thinking any situation, and so he was seeing maybe there's some workmen were coming to fix some things, and he's always arranging prasadam, so they could get some prasadam, or he's just taking any just tiny little things. He's got his eye open, constantly, just trying to work out how he can be of service. Because again, come to these relationships, some of us need to be explicitly told, okay, you do this service here, okay, and that's it, and you clock off, something sort of like that. I don't really like this analogy, but I like to say like the husband and wife, But more than that, you're just thinking constantly, how can I find some service? Because this is the rarest thing. And then when Krishna sees that mood, he reciprocates with you. Like oftentimes I found we can just be feeling a bit like we just want some more time to do sadhana or something, and you notice that okay, then some more time does arise. And if you use that time well, then more time comes as a result of that. Whereas I've noticed as well, if I'm thinking, I would just like some time to read, etc., etc., and then some time comes, and then I don't properly utilize that time, then that time doesn't arise again for something. Krishna is seeing like the mood, the internal mood of the devotee. If he sees that we're eager and then then he's in control of everything. He'll give service, he'll give time. So that's why we have to be very much anxious. Okay, maybe I'll pause here. If there's any comments or questions, reflections, or
At this point about that all the suffering comes through the mind, although you generally think the bad weather today is rainy and cloudy day, it's a misery. In Scotland we have plenty of that, or others as well. We often become a cause of our distress, how other people do things, and etc. But realizing that suffering comes from a mind, you can take more responsibility as well for your suffering, because you can blame the weather, and other people, and etc. But most important, if we can take more responsibility for our suffering that is coming from our own mind, then we also can be able to react in a better ways, in a more Krishna conscious ways, because you cannot completely avoid it actually, and even a direction of the mind will still be there to some extent. It was Bharat, Jat Bharat, when Maharaj Rahugana kind of shouted at him and described that his mind actually reacted, but he pacified it with intelligence. So this is how the mind suffering is reduced, by sharpening our intelligence with Shastra. The weapon of Shastra can handle the suffering a lot better coming from these three things.
If I can maybe ask, actually, no, it's not supposed to work this way, but it's saying that the body is the source of all miseries, but I'm not fully understanding how. Whenever we read about it, it actually seems like the mind is the source of all miseries. So maybe someone could perhaps explain why it's described that the body is the source of all miseries.
My understanding is that one of the most important fundamental philosophical points is that we are not this body. But actually, if you look a little bit deeper in the statement, the principle of I'm not the body also includes I'm not the mind. So it's like a taken as a whole. When you describe the body is, there is senses, there's a mind, and etc. It's more perceivable philosophical point, that you're not this body, because we're very much on the bodily platform. So generally we don't preach to people, especially newcomers, you're not this mind, but you're not this body. This is something that we can immediately relate to. So it's just like, obviously there's many different dimensions to understand this, but at least this is what comes to my mind, is that body is a source of suffering, which includes, like, even in this verse that quoted in the purport, it says, the living entity struggles with the six senses that include the mind. So, technically, living entity struggles with the body that includes the senses, the mind, etc.
Question, bro. Thank you for the nice class. Somewhere like soul and consciousness, is consciousness different from the soul, or is consciousness the soul?
Um, I've heard it described the same analogy that the sun rays and the sun. So, in one sense, is non-different, but one's emanating. Like the consciousness is dependent upon the soul. This is a source, it's sort of a shelter. But yeah, like qualitatively, they're non-different as far as my understanding goes. Maybe if you have some more realizations, you could share.
And speaking of mind and attachments, if say someone is attached to material objects, not to persons, material objects, what body is there for him in the next life? Like, how does it work if someone is attached to house, big house? Does he become like the house in next life?
He becomes the dog of the house. He looks after the house. Yeah, maybe it's not so much the actual physical object; it's the mentality that's created by it. So the house with a sense of this is my land, this is mine. It's bigger than everybody else's. It's nice. No one else is allowed in here. You know these. Oh, there's some Hare Krishnas knocking at the door. No, they're not coming in. We'll put a sign on the door that says no, no religious groups, like this. And therefore that develops the mindset of, you see it with animals. That's all. It's this defending propensity. It's just so strong. They're just in constant anxiety. You know, some animals, they always, let's say a dog sometimes sleeps with his ear open. It's quite, because then they're just thinking of how, how to defend. And it's funny actually. We had a dog growing up. She's still alive actually. Nice enough dog, as dogs go. Not the biggest fan, but we got some advice from. There was a woman who was at the vet. She was like a dog trainer, basically saying that if you want the dog to be happy and satisfied, then you have to very much be in control of the dog. You have to let the dog know that it's your owner. So you actually have to, and you have to do this through sort of dog language. You have to some things like eat first, because in dog sort of brains, then whoever eats first is the sort of the dominant one. Similarly, you have to leave the door first. If you're walking out, you don't let the dog lead in front. You go before. And there's other things. There's also, if you want to chastise the dog, there's no good saying that is very bad, because the dog doesn't understand. You have to go make some noise. But then when the dog is satisfied, thinking, okay, I'm subordinate, then he can relax. Whereas otherwise, what happens in most relationships is the dog thinks, okay, no one's actually in charge of this situation. Okay, I'm going to have to protect this family. Oh, there's someone coming the door. And the dog gets in constant stress, actually. I guess it's the same with others, materialistic people, they're thinking that they're completely in control of the situation. They have to protect it. But then Prabhupada says, this is your dog collar, and this shows that actually you have a master, and you're very much subordinate to that master. He's also protecting you. And you see the devotees is like that. And this is how you can become, detached from all your material surroundings, etc. Is to know that, I don't own any of this. I'm simply, simply a servant of my spiritual master. Yeah, and then for this, there's none of that anxiety. But it's funny because This whole mentality of having some animals just because people want to have that propensity to lord it over something else, and they'll end up taking birth there next. Does this help?